Hello everybody, I'm Eternal Flame here, and today I wanted to talk about a video topic idea that I brought up in my previous video where I talked about 5 ideas for a JJK prequel series, where in this video I want to talk about my idea for a JJK sequel series. However, this video is going to be a bit different than the JJK prequel series. So the JJK prequel series, I was just going over past stories that we could have access to, while with the sequel series, I think there's only really one path you can go with the sequel series of who to follow, and I wanted to talk about the advantages and disadvantages as well as the worries people would have with a sequel series for JJK, and if it should even be made. But before we get into the video, this video is sponsored by TTA Aesthetic, and if you want some really cool anime merch, go check them out and use our discount code EF10, and at the end of the video there will be much more details about their types of merch and my suggestions. However, the link is in the description below, so without further ado, let's get straight into this. So a JJK sequel series is going to be innately different from a JJK prequel series, where the main purpose of a JJK prequel series would be to answer unanswered questions that a lot of people want answers to. The purpose of a JJK sequel series would not need to be anywhere near as focused as a JJK prequel series. And that's one of the advantages, in my opinion, for a JJK sequel series in comparison to a JJK prequel series. A JJK sequel series has a lot more potential to be open-ended and ways you need to go. With a prequel series, there are things you absolutely need to do, and things you can't really go outside of. Now, yes, there is still some freedom left, but with a prequel series, there are some things that are just set in stone, like canon events. However, for a sequel series, the sky is the limit, and there isn't really any other limits to a sequel series. And JJK, in my opinion, has enough threads they can follow up on, so they could actually make a sequel series about it if they wanted to. For example, the after effects of the world knowing about cursed energy now being a thing, the potential of all of Tengen's barriers now being removed, making cursed spirits a worldwide phenomena. Like, one of the easiest plot threads that would be possible to make is basically a world war on cursed energy and trying to get cursed energy, and as a result of that, all of the cursed spirits forming from the fear of other countries invading Japan. After all, we knew all the other countries were starting to invade Japan thanks to Kenjaku letting everybody know cursed energy was a thing, so it's very easy to make a plot following that up directly. There's also trying to create a brand new Jujutsu world. Now, the higher-ups are dead, as well as Gojo being dead. They're basically gonna have to rebuild the Jujutsu world and Jujutsu High from scratch. This could also honestly lead into a basically worldwide Jujutsu system rather than it simply being limited to Japan. Now that Tengen's barriers could potentially be gone, it could make cursed spirits spread worldwide, and while Japan would be like the main base, it could make Jujutsu sorcerers have to be everywhere on the planet as well, and trying to make the world accustomed to its new reality of having cursed spirits everywhere and sorcerers everywhere, rather than it just being limited to one place. This could also lead into one of the most requested things I have seen, at least in Jujutsu Kaisen, which is a lot of people requesting for cursed spirits from other countries based on the fears from other countries, rather than just it being limited to Japan. Like, imagine some based on Greek gods, for example, or some other types of religions, or based on things like that, and curses based on that for people to have to fight in this new world. All with the potential of the merger eventually coming into maybe, probably, I'm not too sure about the merger myself, but that also has some potential for coming in. In my opinion, there is just a lot of potential for JJK to have a sequel series. And maybe in the end, the potential removal or a new system as a whole in comparison to cursed energy. After all, the entire plot thread that was established a while back of cursed energy being the main problem of the world through Yuki and Geto is still up in the air, so they could do that for JJK Part 2. After all they really did was defeat Sukuna, which, like, I know defeating Sukuna is a crazy and huge thing, but at the same time, how much of the world has really changed? It's more so just things are eventually going to go back to normal, rather than potentially a huge fix. So this is also a potential angle they could go for a JJK sequel of trying to end the cycle of curses once and for all. Now, I'm not going to say that they're going to go down this angle 100%, but I do think there is story potential for that one too. Another angle they could take are some radical countries trying to optimize cursed energy and force it to be created for their own reasons, basically following the steps of Kenjaku, whether they think it's because it would advance humanity the most, or effectively by advancing cursed energy heavily, they could end up creating an army of sorcerers, allowing them to take over other countries. There was just a lot of potential for it. A sequel series would also allow us to see our cast continue to develop. For example, it would allow us to see how Yuji is going to develop his techniques, as he had just awakened blood manipulation a month ago, while also just recently awakening Shrine. So now he's going to have time to develop them and use them against cursed spirits, and it would allow us to see several other sorcerers develop too, like Megumi Fushiguro, and seeing what type of sorcerer Megumi will become after the damage Sukuna had caused to him. And finally, it would allow us to see Gojo's dream happening live, a new Jujutsu society that Gojo had fostered resulting from his strong students, all of them together fostering this new society that is more open for sorcerers and just a better society overall, a new meaning to what it means to be the strongest. You could also have smaller fun moments for the main cast to bond, like the main trio, Nobara, Yuji, and Megumi. After all, one of the biggest complaints that I've seen some people have is the fact we don't see them bond that much, but we could do that through a sequel series. There's just a lot of potential for them, for the characters to develop, as well as for them to just build even deeper bonds with each other and eventually graduate preparing for this new generation. They could even end up taking upperclassmen roles, similar to how Yuta and Inumaki and Maki had done so. Like, just imagine Yuji pulling a Todo with a younger student, or Nobara taking another student under her wing, or Megumi just vibing out with some of the students as well as the continued research of the soul. We could even, through this type of sequel series, see what the entire details of the soul book was, because just imagine Yuji both having the role of being a student while also teaching people about the soul, as he's the only one who really understands it at this point. There's just a lot of interesting potential for a sequel series to happen in my opinion. However, there are some understandable problems which I want to talk about now. One of the biggest concerns I have seen for a JJK sequel series that I think a lot of people have is what we call the Boruto problem. And the way to explain the Boruto problem is pretty simple: the constant amount of villains that have surpassed the previous villains from the previous series. For example, the large amount of Boruto characters and villains that have ended up surpassing people like Madara back during his prime. However, I don't think that's going to be as much of a problem for JJK, where I don't think there's going to actually be that many villains, if any villains at all, that actually end up surpassing Gojo or Sukuna. Now, the main reason why I don't think that will happen in the JJK series is because none of the characters we have currently have even gone anywhere close to Gojo or Sukuna in terms of power. The only debatable character that might have gotten close to them in power is actually Yuta in Gojo's body, and even then, it is made pretty adamantly clear that Yuta in Gojo's body is still not anywhere close to Gojo or Sukuna. Like, the two of the people who are often put in the top 10, those being Yuta and Hakari, have been made pretty clear to be one-shot by Gojo's Blue Fist, and Sukuna is just keeping up with that Gojo, if not stronger, depending on who you ask, but it is made pretty clear that no matter what, that Gojo and Sukuna are just leagues ahead of everybody, so it is very possible to introduce stronger villains that are stronger than the cast themselves, but still not approaching that Gojo and Sukuna level. After all, for them to even stand a chance against Sukuna, they needed to include several strategies after Gojo had already succeeded in nerfing him through the brain damage, and Yuji had developing his own techniques. In order to specifically nerf Sukuna, they needed to do a lot of teamwork just to make sure they had a chance to nerf Sukuna. So because of that, it is very possible to introduce curses or new threats that can easily be challenges for people like Yuta Akotsu and Yuji, but still not be anywhere close to Gojo. Now, there is definitely going to be a power cliff in the world itself, but that makes a lot of sense with Jujutsu Kaisen in general. Reminder, Gojo's sheer raw existence was enough to make it so all cursed spirits needed to increase their own powers. What type of consequences are there going to be on the world now that A, the barrier is gone, B, Sukuna had existed for a little bit as well, so the world's already going to be set out of balance, and C, all these strong sorcerers are now going to exist as well. So of course, while the average itself is going to become much stronger, I don't think it's going to be as much of a problem as people think, purely because no one has reached the levels of Gojo and Sukuna yet. Now maybe at the end of the series this might end up happening, and hell, for all I know, I might even be wrong, because there are still 3 chapters left in JJK at the time I'm recording this. They might end up making a statement that Yuji is now the strongest, that Yuta is now the strongest, that Yuji absorbed the power of Sukuna, that Megumi is the strongest, who knows, but right now at the current time of recording this isn't really seeming to be a problem, since no one has reached the level of Sukuna and Gojo yet, thus their power levels are still relevant because no one's going to be as strong as them. This could even actually play into the themes themselves, to see if these new generations of students are ready to take on the mantle of Gojo. Of course, that question was already answered through Sukuna, but this is also going to be answered through the new threats that are going to exist now that Gojo no longer exists to ward them off. There's also another issue that I know people have, which is mainly to do with cursed spirits as a villain, which is mainly because of the fact that cursed spirits kind of get really easily countered if you're able to overwhelm them with positive amounts of cursed energy. However, I don't really see that being a bad thing if I'm being honest. It could be a really fun thing to work around, especially considering there are only currently like 2 characters that can actually do that. That's assuming Megumi still has access to Round Deer, and assuming that Yuta Akotsu is still alive after all as well. So whoever is writing this could end up having to write around this as a challenge for them. It could really help to show the level of adaptation and the intelligence levels that these cursed spirits have to be able to figure out their weakness and figure out a way to counter it, making them that much more of a threat and that much more needed to be dealt with because they develop this level of intelligence. However, those are the two main issues that I have been seeing a lot of people having with a sequel, but in my opinion, those two narrative issues aren't really going to be that much of an issue for a sequel for JJK. After all, one of the issues I just don't think is going to happen since none of the characters have surpassed Gojo, so you don't really need to make a character stronger than Gojo and Sukuna in order to actually be a threat to the cast. It can just be focused on individuals, or there can just be a group of cursed spirits that are all strong on their own right, challenging the main cast. And if I'm being honest, that's sort of the other reason why I kinda do want a JJK sequel more than I want a JJK prequel. One of the most interesting things about JJK has always been the ever-cycling nature of curse energy between curses and humans, and how they might potentially try and break out of it, the attempts to break out of it, and also just how they deal with living with that cycle. Now, while of course I do love the Culling games, and I do love Sukuna and Kenjaku as villains, they're all amazing villains to me. However, I believe one of the things that made JJK so special was the bonds that had formed between curses and humans, as well as just the constant question that the early parts of JJK always ended up providing to the characters, which was the question of what does it mean to be human and what does it mean to be a sorcerer. This is also why, in my opinion, a lot of people consider Shibuya to be such a peak arc. The arc between Mahito and Yuji, and the arc of writing between what truly makes a human and what will decide the fate of the planet in the next years. As well as the arc that Yuji goes through where he has to figure out he's a cog in the system, and I just really want to see more of that. More of people either trying to break away from that cog mentality or entering into that cog mentality in order to continue to make the world run. And finally, the most important thing of them all is it would allow cursed spirits to be an individual threat on their own. One of the biggest problems that I've always had with JJK is the fact that cursed spirits never really felt like that big of a threat on their own. After all, our main cursed spirit antagonists were all led by a human, while some of the other cursed spirits that were threatening, like the Finger Bearers, were threatening because they were amped up by a human. Through a JJK sequel, you could continue to what JJK was originally pitched to be about, which was a conflict between curses and humans, and what that really meant for the world. Now, I do want to note this because I do think this is rather important to note. I do absolutely love the canon story for JJK. It is one of my favorite stories of all times, and considering the fact that I literally have a channel where I talk about JJK more often than not, then yeah, I think you guys can see that, but at the same time, I do miss the old days where we were mainly up against cursed spirits. Now, of course, this is all under the assumption that Gege might want to write a sequel in the future, and this is why I just don't think that would be a problem. Of course, if Gege doesn't want to write a sequel in the future, this entire video is null and void, and I completely understand if Gege doesn't want to write one, but this is mainly just me talking about why I think a sequel would work, and why I don't think it has that many problems. However, I want to hear what you guys' opinion is on a sequel in the future for JJK. So, I hope you all have a good day, and that's the end of this video. Anyway, some more details on TTA Aesthetic. TTA Aesthetic was an old friend of the channel previously known as Fandomian. However, they had ended up rebooting their shop, and now they have a lot more merch on the shop that is really cool. Not just shirts, but also backpacks, necklaces, and basically anything your anime heart can need. I'm not a fan of anime, they have pretty nice normal clothes as well, all available for a pretty nice and affordable price. But you want to have even more of a discount? Use the code EF10 in order to get yourself a discount with the link in the description down below. The link will also be in the comments as well. So what I would recommend getting is Gojo's iconic glasses. After all, not just do they work for cosplays if you want to do a Gojo cosplay, you can just wear them in normal situations because they work really well and they just look really nice. So I hope you all have a good day, and remember to check out TTA Aesthetic.